In the 90s, there were shadows brewing in the underworld of show business. Something was getting ready to stir up the TV show production space, something that might have changed the course of television and opened the gates to incredible things to come. In 1995, Spelling Television, a production company, had acquired the rights to develop a TV series based on a tabletop role-playing game. It was a stroke of luck, really. John Lickley, who would become the creator of the show, got a call from his agent about a book that he found at a bookshop. That book later became the Bible of the show, the source of information for the show Kindred The Embraced. That book was one of the first editions of Vampire the Masquerade. Vampire the Masquerade is part of the World of Darkness tabletop role-playing games, or TTRPG for short. At its core, World of Darkness is an exploration of supernatural creatures such as vampires, werewolves, mages, and more, and the struggle to live in a world where they all have to coexist. It's often a very raw portrayal of a fight for humanity and also the evil necessary to control the world in their favor. I'd like to take you through an analysis of Kindred The Embraced and provide some context about how it was made and how it was released. I'm a fan of World of Darkness universe, and while I don't consider myself an expert on it, I think you'll find some useful insights to compare both. With that said, I hope you'll stay with me through this journey. I've watched the show twice, the second one with director's commentary. I also checked the deleted scenes and making of videos available on its DVD release. First, I'll take you through each episode, narrating the most important aspects and providing some context clips. Then we'll dive into some more interesting information about the show and how it got made. There's some information that you should know beforehand in case you're not a fan of World of Darkness. You'll hear me refer to the clans. On the show, there are 5 mentioned: Ventru, Bruja, Nosferatu, Toreador, and Gangrel. There are more, but these are the ones referred in the show. You can think of them as families of vampires, with their own characteristics. Each family has a hierarchy present in each city. On top is the primogen that each clan has, then there is the prince that oversees all the primogen. Vampires also don't like using that word to refer to themselves, as that's a human creation. They refer to themselves as kindred. The Masquerade is a set of rules and law that most kindred abide by, in order to keep secrecy and safety for all kindred. Sometimes it can bend, and sometimes you can find a loophole, but for the most part, if you want to be kindred, you follow the Masquerade, and you accept your prince as the judge for those laws.
Your morality doesn't apply to us. I am the law among my kind. The judge, the jury, and the executioner.
And we are all caught up. If you don't want to get spoilers about the show, consider this your point of no return on that. Settle in and let's start. Episode 1: The Original Saga. The episode starts with a frenetic run through a rooftop on the city of San Francisco, the main location for the show. 2 cops arrive at the scene, Frank and Sony. Remember Frank, you're going to see a lot more of Frank going forward. They get to the rooftop to find 3 people fighting, and one of them gets stabbed through the chest and shortly after bursts into flames. These are the bloodsuckers, the drinkers of the red juice that flows in our veins. These are the vampires. Or kindred. Like me, you probably got your first shock with the lore that you know. In Kindred The Embraced, vampires can walk in the sun, as long as they have fed the previous day. While it's not impossible for vampires in the World of Darkness to be in sunlight and not die, it's still a big stretch to have vampires in Kindred The Embrace soak up all that sunlight and not be bothered by it. But let's move forward. Frank and his buddy cop go to the morgue, where the doctor will try to figure out what happened and why this guy burst up into flames. The show then introduces us to Julian Luna, a vampire of the clan Ventru and prince of the city. He was friends with the vampire that burst into flames and has a vested interest in figuring out what happened, We also see Archon Rain, the previous Prince of San Francisco and the mentor of Julian. We go back to Frank. Remember Frank? This guy is dating Alexandra, the previous romantic interest of Julian, and he's doing this in order to try and get close to Julian. You see, Frank has a bit of a bone to pick with Julian, as he thinks he's a mobster, a criminal, a scoundrel even. While Frank is not wrong, he's also not right. They talk a bit about Julian, they flirt, and Alexandra goes to the bathroom and actually feeds on a woman there. Yes, Frank is dating a vampire. There's just a bit of foreshadowing around here, not much else, so let's skip forward to sexy times. Frank has sex with Alexandra in what can only be described as a very 90s appropriate romantic scene, which is kinda tame for the modern times, but it was the 90s. It was pretty daring to do it on a TV show back then. The next scene will see Julian with Lily, the primogene of Toreador clan, on their way to the Haven, the club that she owns. They are interrupted by a gangrel named Cash, unhappy that his primogene was killed on a roof. Primogenes are basically the top bosses of each clan in the city. They keep their respective clans in check and have meetings with the prince to discuss any issues that can affect the kindred. So Julian offers Cash the same job that his primogene had before getting killed, to be his bodyguard, which Cash accepts. But this conversation is cut short as a drive-by with a phosphorus gun happens. Someone wants to take Julian out. Julian goes to seek counsel from his friend Daedalus, a Nosferatu. And you know he's a Nosferatu because of his shiny bald and being ugly as sin. They talk about Eddie Fiori, the Bruja, Primogen, and the prime suspect for the earlier drive-by. Remember Daedalus, because he will be one of the most impressive representations of a kindred. Alexandra meets Julian outside his mansion and asks him to let her embrace Frank, the cop that she is in love with. Julian very clearly says no because he's tired of dumb ideas. Let me talk about Julian for a second. This actor carries the whole show on his back. Every interaction he has with any other actor automatically uplifts the entire performance of that actor. He carries himself like a true Ventru, and is a real delight to watch. It's not like the other actors did a bad job, it's that he is that good. We go back to the morgue and we see an amazing display of the Nosferatu in action. I'm not even going to describe it, just watch.
Open the veins of your arm with the scalpel. Do it now.
No question shall be asked about the guy that bursts into flame. Julian receives news of his human grandson passing away, so he goes to the wake, but not before taking a nap on his dead wife's coffin. There's actually a very interesting connection of Julian's family and himself being at the forefront of the wine business as it was booming, which I thought was a really nice touch and proves that the creators really knew how to draw out these characters a little bit more and make them more interesting. While at the wake, Julian's human niece shows up, Sasha. And goddamn, does this girl know how to make an entrance. She tells everyone how amazing the old man was and plants a kiss right on his dead lips. Julian invites her to stay with him, as she has no other place to go, and she accepts. Back to Frank and Alexandra. Yep, still banging. We'll check in on them later. Let's see what Julian and Lily are doing back in the city. Oh, okay. Also banging. They have an old romance going on, which gets interesting later on, as both involve themselves with other people too at the same time. Vampires, am I right? We are now introduced to the Bruja Primogen, Eddie Fiori. And in my opinion, I think this is the clan that gets the most misrepresentation. They just made them like a frat house of school bullies that never got out of puberty, so they want to make money, pump iron, and kill fools. That's it. There's not a whole lot of nuance to them, at least until later on in the show. The Primogen gets together and decides on a blood hunt against Alexandra, for breaking the Masquerade and putting all Kindred in danger. They all kiss the ring of Julian as he asserts dominance and tells Eddie that if he steps out of the line, he's going to get the final death. Spoiler alert, Eddie steps out of the line pretty much every waking day. Back to Frank and Alexandra. They finished banging, and after an emotional scene between the two, Alexandra turns into a wolf and runs away. Frank is in shambles because he can't figure out what is going on. He understands something is up, and is very obviously falling for Alexandra's charming powers as kindred. Alexandra tries to flee the city and gets into a taxi, which is driven by Daedalus. I was expecting a repeat of the morgue scene, but instead he takes her to the Golden Gate Bridge and tells her to jump into the water to save herself. Frank arrives in time to see Alexandra burst into flames and fall, presumably to her death. He is once again in shambles because this is the second girlfriend of his that kills herself. What a catch, this guy! He later confronts Julian, shoots him, but it basically goes nowhere. While he is determined to take Julian down, he really doesn't know how. It's also revealed that Sonny, Frank's buddy cop, is actually a kindred and allied to Eddie. At the end of the episode, we see Alexandra underwater, opening her eyes to reveal she's still alive. This is the last time we see her in the show. I think the writers would have brought her back somehow in later seasons, but they didn't really get the chance. Episode 2: Prince of the City. Now it's a good time to explain that the pilot has an extended cut, and that's what I saw. So to my surprise, when I saw episode 2, there were some scenes that were reused to provide context to what happened, due to the show airing with a shorter first episode that didn't provide all the context. I'm mostly going to skip these scenes because I've already talked about them. I just wanted to make sure you're aware of this in case you watch it eventually and wonder why I didn't talk about them again. The second episode opens up with your favorite cop, Frank, still on the hunt for Julian, but now he has a haircut, which honestly makes him look a lot less like a man about to end it all. In this scene, the police chief warns Frank to keep away from Julian and to drop the case. So instead, they decide to pick up a criminal from the streets and use him as a mole to listen into Eddie Fiori's conversations. Surprise, surprise, the plan fails, because even this Bruja Primogen isn't that stupid. Most of the criminals manage to get away, and Eddie threatens Frank that if he keeps meddling, he's going to get himself killed. Frank is really just trying to do his job here, but the dude can't catch a break. We get to see more of Julian and Sasha as well, bonding together after she gets herself arrested. She also meets Cash for the first time, and the spark of young romance is lit. Back to Frank. He's getting scolded because a criminal died at the previous stakeout on Eddie, and of course everyone thinks Frank is the prime suspect because he was there. In a weird turn of events, the police chief seems to not care much about the investigation of internal affairs and the possibility of Frank being a crazed murderer.
We're wasting our time here. We should be out looking for the guy to kill Boyle, Danelli, and Fiori. Excuse me.
Wait until IA finishes their investigation. Frank! Go get him. Make it stick.
Yeah, make it stick, Frank. We get another plotline to follow. Caitlin, a journalist, is investigating Julian for an article, and her interest is met with a lot of reservations from Julian, of course. But towards the end of the episode, we'll see how he starts to fall in love with her. He actually bought the newspaper she works with, you know, just so he has one more excuse to spend time with her. This is commitment. If you're not willing to invest a significant portion of your venture-built trust fund, do you even love her, bro? Frank meets Julian at a diner, seeking help about the previous murderer. He starts acting a lot smarter now, still putting himself in danger as he has made enemies of basically everyone except Julian that made a promise to Alexandra to keep him safe. But if you're familiar with the world of darkness, you know what Frank is shaping up to become. A hunter. It was teased on episode 1 that Sony was working with Eddie. Turns out he's actually a Ventru, working for Julian as a spy. They find out Eddie is somewhat responsible for killing the gangrel Primogen, but they decide since he's not directly responsible, he gets a pass. You know, the guy that is obviously a crook should get a pass every once in a while. There's not much else going on. Julian still bangs Lily while falling in love with Caitlin. Frank has no friends, except Julian. Sasha and Cash are in love. Cash wants to see Eddie dead. Eddie just wants to be prince and make money. We are all caught up. Episode 3. The Nightstalker. The episode starts with the House of the Rising Sun being played at the Haven, and now we see one of the most interesting parts that actually shows the creators knew about what they were creating with the lore. Daedalus struggling with seeing the beauty in the voice of a beautiful singer, but being self-aware about his appearance and how he would never be able to get close to her. It's a very Nosferatu thing, I'd say, and to me, it was one of the best scenes. Jeff Kober absolutely kills it as Daedalus. He just gets Nosferatu really well. They could have gone the route of the ugly vampire, but instead made him more emotionally intelligent and aware. Cash finds there's a drunk rowdy Kindred that seems to be causing problems, and as chief of security, he proceeds to beat him up. Police shows up, both get arrested. The name of the episode has a double meaning, as we'll see Daedalus stalk the singer, knowing he's not able to get close to her. But the rowdy guy at the bar also turns out to be a bit of a serial killer. There isn't much on this episode that moves the overall plot of the series forward, as it is very self-contained. The most fascinating part is really Daedalus and how he portrays the duality of the Nosferatu nature. Julian is working with Frank to find out where the serial killer is, and of course, Frank gets the worst of it. There are some other moments where Julian tries to control Sasha, as she is proving to be a wild card and very close to discovering he is a kindred. The journalist Caitlin keeps deepening her research on Julian, and both keep falling in love with each other. It's more of an episode to deepen the relationships between the characters, and I think it's great. By the end of this episode you'll have at least one favorite character that you are looking forward to see, and the self-contained nature of these episodes allow the audience to be exposed to more of the Kindred lore without feeling too overbearing. Episode 4. Romeo and Juliet. Sasha and Cash are even more in love, although their relationship seems to be a bomb waiting to go off. Cash really wants to embrace Sasha and make her kindred, but Julian refuses. I find that Cash is probably the most underdeveloped character in the show. He's just there to do what Julian tells him, and to be the love interest of Sasha. He doesn't feel like his own person. It's a shame, he doesn't get really much development in 8 episodes. Eddie plans more fuckery to undermine Julian, as usual. We get a new plot with Daedalus which once again carries the show. He's on the hunt for a kindred in a children's hospital that is feeding off the children. He manages to kill him in a badass vampire moment that I really loved.
For the horror you bring to the innocent, your prince sentences you to final death.
One of the kids sees Daedalus kill the doctor, but he's not scared of him. The kid has a terminal illness and he is not long for this world, so Daedalus takes him back to Julian and asks him to embrace him. Daedalus doesn't want to embrace the kid himself, knowing that he would be cursed to live as a disfigured Nosferatu, shunned by most. Julian doesn't want to do it, as he is a kid and it would be against the Masquerade, the law of the kindred. Daedalus will eventually save the kid through his knowledge of alchemy later on the episode. Cash asks Julian to embrace Sasha again, and Julian allows it if she is willing. Cash is happy and goes to see Sasha, only to find her being forcibly embraced by Bruja. It's the worst thing that could happen, because in the show, Bruja are mortal enemies of gangrels. To Sasha, it's an even more horrible experience, very violent, and leaves her very much out of it. It's a really impactful scene and shows the creators knew that being embraced against your will is a very awful way to become kindred. And guess who was behind it? Eddie! Of course, it was Eddie, the little maniac. Julian is pissed and he goes to confront Eddie and the Bruja. Things are about to go down before the illest of the hill appear. They basically agree on allowing Eddie to go scot-free, but kill the actual kindred that embraced Sasha against her will. At the end of the episode, we see Eddie being thrown out of a car into the sun, but before he dies, Julian reminds Eddie that he lives because he allows it, and that he won't get a second chance. This was Eddie's second chance already, and I'll say Julian is being way too benevolent with this asshole. Episode 5. Live fast, die young, and leave a good-looking corpse. This episode opens at the Haven with a rock star dude performing. Zane is a kindred that was turned by Lily, the primogen of the Toreador clan, and he just wants to rock and roll. There is no two dimensions to him, really. He is here to be yet another kindred popping off, unable to control himself. He lives with a girl that he embraces against her will, and in the rest of the episode we learn it's not the first. Everyone thinks the girl is dead until she wakes up in the hospital, and of course it's Frank running around trying to find her. Eventually it's Julian that helps her out and informs her of what happened to her. After that, she's gone from the story completely. Sasha starts to rebel due to her embrace and is being pushed away by Cash, that dates the Bruja. She then starts hanging around with the Bruja and she's just putting herself in danger. For once, Frank does his job successfully and brings Zane to Julian so that he can deal with him. This decision falls to the Council of Primogens, and it's agreed that Zane must die. Lily is the one to do it. As Caitlin writes about the rise and fall of yet another rock star, oblivious to what Zane actually was. Episode 6. The Rise and Fall of Eddie Fiori. If you're finding my plot summaries shorter with each episode, it's not just you. The more the show goes on, the more diluted the plotlines become. The more dialogue we see between the characters showing feelings towards each other, but not a whole lot of plot moving forward, and more self-contained plotlines that don't really go anywhere on the overarching plot. This show was building itself, showing what the rules of the world were, and wasn't afraid to have confidence that a second season would be a possibility. More on that later. The 6th episode starts with Lily hiring an investigator to look into Julian and Caitlin and take some compromising photos of the two. Lily and Julian have a romantic relationship of sorts, but it's never really set on feelings and more of a desire to not be alone. Eddie plots next steps with his sire to overthrow Julian. His sire is Cyrus, the Prince of Los Angeles. They hatch a plan to use an Assamite kindred to get close to Julian and assassinate him. Tensions rise between the Bruja and the Ventru, and Julian gets the first attempt at his life while he's visiting Caitlin. The Assamite, however, fails. Sasha and Cash rekindle their relationship and figure out that just being part of a clan doesn't make it all that they are. They are still their own person with their own beliefs, and that their relationship might just work. The investigator got found out, and Julian is pissed at Lily for endangering the kindred and nearly breaking the Masquerade. Meanwhile, Frank and Caitlin keep investigating the strange happenings around Julian. While Frank knows about the kindred, Caitlin doesn't. The Assamite does another attempt at Julian's life and seems to succeed, so Eddie gathers the rest of the Primogens, hoping they'll support him in becoming the next prince. Until Julian walks in, the Assamite assassination failed for a second time, and Eddie finally gets killed by an enraged Lily. Episode 7. Bad Moon Rising. This episode starts with Julian in a meeting with employees of his newly acquired newspaper. That meeting includes Caitlin, that is by now fully in love with Julian. She gets the nasty surprise of seeing Lily at the house where Julian lives. Julian explains it's also where Lily lives, because they are business partners. For some reason, Caitlin was kinda okay with it. It felt weird and a little bit convoluted how they wanted to present the tension between these three characters, which will be the main focus of this episode. We get a secondary plot that will happen throughout. A mother is having a picnic with their baby, and the ugliest scene Nosferatu steals her baby.
Stop! That's
And of course she goes to the police to report this crime and finds none other than Frank, our beloved cop/vampire hunter. He is with his partner Sonny that reports this case to Julian. Based on sketch artist drawing of the criminal Nosferatu, they deduce the kindred behind it is Goth, a previously banished Nosferatu. Not just a Nosferatu that is a Goth, although this Goth Nosferatu is also Goth, as well as being called Goth. Goth's plan is then revealed. He and Camilla, another Nosferatu, want to do a blood ritual to give them more power and restore the clan's previous power. This obviously shatters the Masquerade rules and would have severe consequences for all kindred if it goes through. So Daedalus tries to convince the Nosferatu to not side with Goth, but fails. They just don't want to hear him. So Julian will need to intervene, and Daedalus gives him some advice on what to do. We get one more glimpse at the show's rules.
Goth gains strength from the full moon. If it comes to a battle, keep his back to the moon. That will diminish his powers.
I'll remember.
Julian, share a glass of wine with me.
Throughout the episode, Caitlin is very interested in the story, publishing news about it, and following leads along with Frank. And so Lily takes this as an opportunity to put her in harm's way and outside of Julian's protection. By now, Lily is shown to be very two-faced. She cares for her kindred a lot, but Julian most of all, and while there is a sort of romance between the two, it seems to transcend the natural definition of it. For Julian, Lily is just comfort before he falls in love with Caitlin. For Lily, Julian is hers alone, and she won't stop at nothing to make sure of that. I was really hyped up to see a full duel between two kindred, but alas, I think it wasn't in the budget. Julian confronts Goth and trades his life for that of the babies, promising Goth that him being a prince will grant the Nosferatu much more power. This is actually very common in the Vampire the Masquerade lore, and it is referred to as diablerie. Caitlin finds the Nosferatu hideout and talks with Camilla. She actually manages to sway Camilla into thinking of the baby by appealing to her humanity, before having her memories of this night wiped away. Julian pushes Camilla to release the baby, and she accepts. And we then finally get the kindred on kindred violence. Take a look.
Julian? A gift from Daedalus.
It's not that bad. We need to consider the budget of this show was very limited, and I think it's very well shot actually. The night ambience, the fog rolls in, Camilla watching the fight as an ancient judge of the kindred, it's really cool to see. The episode ends with the baby being delivered to the mother and Julian and Caitlin. Episode 8 Cabin in the Woods. The episode starts with Archon discussing how dangerous it is for the prince to leave the city, even if for a short time, as Julian wants to have some time alone with Caitlin outside of the city. Julian charges Archon with the keeping of the peace while he is out of the city. Caitlin did her research and decides to take Julian to a place where once his family lived. It is revealed that the Bruja were almost decimated by Archon a few years back, and now they are plotting their revenge, while Julian is outside of the city. Some of the Bruja are still around the place where Julian and Caitlin are going to, so they arrange an ambush. But before that happens, we get to reveal that before Julian was a prince, he was a hitman for the Archon. He was responsible for killing all those Bruja under the guise of peace. So the ambush happens and Julian fights well, but he is badly injured and close to dying. Caitlin is now starting to put the pieces together about the Kindred, and then Julian reveals who he actually is. Back in the city, Archon feels the danger Julian is in and reveals to Daedalus that the Bruja that Julian killed years ago were actually harmless. Archon used Julian as a weapon against them to do a little bit of clan cleansing. As Julian is almost dying, Caitlin feeds her blood to him, and his wounds are healed. Julian, not wanting to embrace Caitlin, erases her memory so that the masquerade won't be broken.
As long as you know what I am, there are only two ways this can end. You'll have to be embraced, or you'll have to die. And I will never let either of those happen.
They eventually start making their way to the city, and when they arrive, they are too late. Archon has been ambushed by the Bruja and is now dead. After the funeral, the Bruja sit at the table of the Primogens once again, and Julian accuses them of killing Archon, which they openly admit to. According to the Kindred law, they have the right to kill him, after Archon needlessly killed members of the Bruja clan. The Primogens and Julian accept this, but with a warning from Julian that if the Bruja step out of the line, they will be met with severe punishment. And this is where the series leaves off. Why is it still relevant? I've asked myself many times during the writing of the scripts of this video, why I'm making it? Who will be the person to see it? What would they like to hear me talk about? To convince them to watch the show, even though I explain to them most of the things that happen on it. And during several rewrites of the script, which I started in Check's Notes, oh yes, early September, I realized I'm talking about it purely because I love it, and because I recognize it was a work of passion. And that's why I also took so long to do it, because I wanted to make it entertaining to the point where even if you didn't go and watch the show now, you can still see how important this show still is. But I wasn't the only one that saw that, because the show enabled others to develop further. Shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Angel, they would never have been done if Kindred didn't show that it was possible. You try and create a show like this in the 90s, as progressive as things started to be in television at that time, there's no way they didn't receive pushback from producers. Luckily, they found great partners to work with that saw the vision of the show through. If I were to make a closer modern comparison, I'd probably include True Blood in the conversation. The show was loosely based on the Charlene Harris novels, and it turned the rules of TV upside down. There was blood and sex all around the show. Well, you don't see that in Kindred The Embraced. It isn't hard to imagine that it was the 90s equivalent to True Blood in that regard. It still has sex, still has blood, just not both at the same time and not as overly graphic. It wanted to explore the darker paths of humanity, much like later shows tried to do. A great showcase of this is how Sasha gets forcibly embraced by the Bruja. I think you can see the easy comparison to one of the most vile acts humans can do to one another, and it didn't throw it in your face with an overly dramatic explanation of what was happening. It showed you what was happening, and we are left to accompany Sasha and Cash in discovering what it means to them. It's one of the plot lines that I wished was explored further in the show, and maybe that's what the showrunners had in mind for season 2. It was kinda glossed over because of the bigger clan war happening in the show, so there wasn't much room to show the ramifications of what happened to Sasha and her psyche. The show was also not afraid of showing the Kindred as deeply flawed. The best way I could describe them would be the humanity's flaws turned up to 11, and it's a common theme in Vampire the Masquerade books and the show. The Kindreds aren't scary because they are monsters, they are scary because they are what humans become when they don't have any limits. We can see this with Sasha and her impulsiveness, with Lily and her jealousy, Daedalus with his insecurities about himself, Eddie with his thirst for power, and so on. Because the show is essentially about humanity, represented through humans or kindreds, it's still relevant as any show today. It's an interesting character exploration in a mysterious world with its own rules. Every time you see Daedalus interact with the other kindred, or even humans in some instances, we can see the duality of the monster inside the man, and the man still trapped inside the monster. He has the sensibility of a human, much more than any other kindred in the show, but is also cursed to look like nothing human. You will never be able to interact at a personal level with a human, and to someone as emotionally intelligent as Daedalus, it is his ultimate curse as a kindred. And Vampire the Masquerade fans will definitely back me up on this, I'm sure.
You'll be all right, I promise.
Your voice. You're afraid. You're even more afraid than I am.
Yes.
What are you afraid of?
That this will end and never come again. That I'll never speak with you or see you again.
What do you want? Really?
To watch over you.
Then why can't I see you?
Jeff Kober knew how to play this character and what being a kindred from the Nosferatu clan is all about. One of the best examples of how the creators of the show really understood the source material is a bonus segment included in the DVD extras. It's the last will and testament of Daedalus, played by Jeff Kober. This was done years after the original show aired, and I couldn't find an exact date, but it goes to show how impactful this show was. And it's an amazing revelation that I think fans of both the show and Vampire the Masquerade will love to see. I won't spoil what it is about, but it really is worth seeing. Why didn't it get a second season? Everyone was eager to see where the show would go next in the second season, but disaster struck when the actor Mark Frankel was killed in a tragic motorcycle accident. He was only 34, he had a whole career ahead of himself. He left a wife and 2 kids. There's no denying that, without an actor like Mark Frankel to carry the show, it wouldn't have been possible to make Kindred. His colleagues say as much during the making of extras that are available on the DVD release of the show. His kindness and rigorous acting proved to be the key to unlocking the performance of several other actors like Jeff Kober as Daedalus, Kelly Rutherford as Caitlin, C. Thomas Howell as Detective Frank Conhack. Every scene with Julian is elevated by his imposing presence and delivery of the lines.
It's been years since I've come to talk with you. I've come to bury our last grandchild, August Octavio, the pride of my life. Gone to his peaceful rest. All that abundance came from you.
It's very rare that we get the chance to see an actor fit a role so well that it is hard to associate the role with anyone else. Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson, Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn, and I think Mark Frankel would have been the face everyone would recognize as a vampire going into the early 2000s. During a time where vampire movies felt too played out, it was his time to really evolve the mythos, but sadly, it wasn't to be. Without Mark, the show couldn't go on, and was ended. Where can I see it? And now for the question you are asking yourself, where could I ever watch this very obscure show? Well, there are good news and bad news. The bad news is that it doesn't seem to be streaming on any of the popular streaming platforms. You can try to track down a copy of the DVD as well, but it might be a bit of an hassle to play it in modern systems. So the good news is that it seems to have reached a state of abandonment, where you can download it from the Internet Archive page that I've linked in the video description, with all extras included. The extras on the DVD are really worth it, especially the Daedalus segment, but also the 2 episodes where some of the cast, creator of the series, and directors discuss their choices for the show. Maybe if we ask for it hard enough, some proper streaming service could pick it up, please? Regardless, I'll provide links in the description so that you can explore the series further. This entire video was a massive effort to put together, not because I felt encumbered by how much I had to work on it, but because I was afraid of not making the show justice. I know there's plenty of snarky comments I made about the show, but remember, that's me trying to entertain you, not something you should take at face value. There's also a lot that I didn't discuss that brings context to the events of the show that you should definitely watch. Please share, comment and like the video. I'd be thrilled to hear your opinions about the show. If you can, hit that subscription button to help my channel reach more people. Thank you so much for watching, and bye bye.